Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight. A shooter breaks into an elementary school in Nashville and kills 3 children and 3 staff members.
We know that she was armed with at least 2 assault-type rifles and a handgun.
Officials say the shooter was transgender and identified as a male. We'll have the very latest from the scene in a live report. Then a tornado nearly 60 miles long leaves a path of destruction deep across Mississippi. The community's hit the hardest by one of the strongest tornadoes the state has ever seen. Plus, while the timing of any potential indictment of Donald Trump remains in the air, the grand jury that could issue that indictment met again today. We're going to tell you what that's about. Plus, government regulators have been looking for a buyer to take the helm of Silicon Valley Bank ever since taking it over earlier this month, and now they finally have one. We're going to tell you who it is. And Israel has seen one of the country's biggest ever protests with hundreds of thousands taking to the street. We'll tell you how it all has to do with overhauling the nation's top court. And competitive drone racing wants to be as big as Formula One. But we're going to ask, is it ready for the mainstream?
So first, I want you to try to just get it up in the air. Try to keep it stable. All right. Now try to pitch forward a little bit. Yeah, there you go. You see it coming at you?
And it has been a horrific day for the families of those killed in Nashville, Tennessee tonight, where the community is dealing with the aftermath of yet another school shooting, this time at a private Christian school that teaches preschool through 6th grade. 3 9-year-old kids and 3 adults in their 60s were killed. Police first got calls about the shooting at about 10 o'clock this morning. They responded immediately, and they found a 28-year-old white transgender male shooter on the 2nd level of the school, at which point the suspect was shot and killed by officers. We've now reported on at least 4 school shootings in 2023 alone. The latest was at a high school in Denver just last week. And today's shooting has many emotional, including this parent from Uvalde, Texas, whose 10-year-old son was killed in the mass shooting at Robb Elementary not even a year ago.
Have y'all had enough yet? In Nashville, 3 kids so far have been pronounced dead. 3 adults have been pronounced dead from a school goddamn shooting. When is enough enough?
NBC News correspondent Kathy Park joins us now. Kathy, horrible, horrible day for this community, for the school. How did it all unfold?
Well, Gadi, it happened shortly after 10 o'clock this morning Central Time, but really it took a matter of minutes, roughly 14 minutes for officers to get to the school and confront the suspect, and the suspect died shortly after that. We are told that the person actually gained entry into the school building through a side door, shot through the side door, and then made it to the 2nd floor. And that's when 5 responding officers confronted the suspect. But this was certainly a day that kind of just shook this community. We are told from teachers and parents that they were actually just shocked by what happened because it was the start of the school day. And there was one teacher who was inside the school at the time who said she was hiding in the closet with shots just ringing out all around her.
And Kathy, 14 minutes, I mean, that must have been an eternity for the people involved and for parents of the school. But a lot of comparisons have been made with Uvalde, except for in terms of how much quicker this particular case was in terms of the response. Can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Exactly. I think, officers are being applauded for how quickly they reacted. They ran toward the gunfire without any hesitation. You mentioned those 14 minutes. Those 14 minutes were critical because they're saying it could have been a whole lot worse. Once they got the call at 10:13 this morning, that is when officers stormed the building and reacted quickly. The students went into lockdown, and obviously this is a small school, a private Christian school, as you mentioned, Gadi, and roughly 200 students enrolled, 40 employees and staff, so word spread very quickly. But once again, it was those officers who reacted very quickly to get to the suspect.
And Kathy, what do we know about the shooter? What does the motive appear to be here?
We do have an ID on the suspect, 28-year-old Audrey Hale. We know that this person actually lived in Nashville and also attended the school. One of the headmasters, our NBC News colleague, was able to reach out to a former headmaster of the student. And this person actually attended the school back in 2005 and was a third grader. So lots of ties with the school. Also, officials are saying that they're combing through a manifesto, writings associated with this shooting, and also maps of the school that were drawn out. And what was interesting, Gadi, during a press conference not too long ago, was that there was a second location that was potentially targeted, but the suspect decided not to move forward with this attack because they were able to assess the scene and kind of realize that there was just way too much police presence there. So decided to kind of just use that one school as the target. So officials are saying this could have been a whole lot worse, but still so many questions. But it sounds like they do have some evidence that they're combing through, and also body camera footage will be released at some point tonight and tomorrow from those responding officers. Gadi.
Kathy Park, thank you. Joining us now is NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, we've heard police say that the shooter is a female. We've also seen reports that the shooter identified as male. Female mass shooters are historically extremely rare, right? Do we know anything about the motive here?
Incredibly rare, Gadi. No, we don't know really anything about the potential motive, except that police said that this person's gender identity may have played some kind of role, but they were not very specific about that, and I think it's pretty dangerous to speculate. And it's also not even clear how this person identifies. They may well be non-binary. We've seen different social media where they identify as a woman, then as a man. So it's hard to know, and it's hard to know where that fits in. But it's incredibly rare for someone born biological female, let's just say that, to become a mass shooter. It's like less than 1% of the cases. When you look at active shooter situations, in fact, NBC research going back to 1979, they could only find 7 instances. And I've never seen a situation where a female has staked out a place like this and arrived with assault rifles in a targeted attack of this nature. It's just, it's absolutely remarkable, Gadi.
And Ken, you just mentioned it. I mean, we're talking 2 assault-style rifles, 1 handgun. What does that tell you about the nature of this particular shooting?
Well, it suggests, and police have confirmed, that this was a planned attack. I mean, this person had apparently, the police say, conducted surveillance of the school where they had been a student at some point some years ago. And now we're learning that this person shot their way into the school. The doors were locked. Police say they shot through the door, got in, had, as you mentioned, those 2 assault rifles and 1 handgun. We don't know much about what happened inside the school in the initial moments of the attack. We know that there's some video that may ultimately shed light on that. But police arrived rather quickly. So it was 14 minutes elapsed, they say, between the first 911 calls, reports of active shooter, and the time that shooter was shot dead by police. So that's a pretty remarkable turnaround. It shows that things could have been a lot worse. And it also appears that the kids at that school had some prior active shooter training, because a lot of them, we're told, started to evacuate on their own. Gadi.
Horrific tragedy. Ken, thanks so much.
You bet.
And 2,000 people live in the town of Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and now almost everyone there has lost someone they knew or loved. On Friday night, a powerful tornado tore through the town and other nearby communities, killing 22 across the region. It was one of the deadliest tornadoes in the history of Mississippi, and the damage it left behind is incredible. This is someone's dining area. Some paintings are still on the wall. The table, you can see that it's still intact, but the entire roof is gone. And this woman, I want to show you this woman in pink. That is Becky Miles. She is standing in what's left of her home where she has lived for more than 20 years.
Today, I got very emotional when I found a sign that my husband and I had over our bed. And the sign said, "This is our happy place." When I saw that, I thought I was going to lose it, because our house is no longer here.
And this pickup right here, that is lodged into what's left of a local diner. Employees were still inside that diner when the tornado struck, and they survived by finding shelter inside of a cooler.
There were 9 of us in all, and my husband helped guide us all in there really quickly, and he went to close the door, but the wind kind of took the door from him. Somehow he managed to get it back, and before he could fully close it, he said, "I see the sky." And that just meant our roof was gone.
Could you imagine fighting the door like that? Let's bring in Priscilla Thompson, who's in Rolling Fork right now. Priscilla, so many lives have been turned upside down by all of this. What are you seeing on the ground there?
Gadi, lives that have been forever changed. I want to give you a sense of where we are standing. We are standing just in front of what used to be a home. There are still cinder blocks on the ground here, but that home, all that destruction back there is what you're seeing of the home that used to be right here. You can see the bars from a mobile home that appears to have been overflipped. There's a pickup truck back there. And this is the type of devastation that we're seeing, just an incredibly powerful tornado that ripped through here. And I have been on the ground here since hours after that tornado touched down, speaking to residents. I spoke to a woman, Melinda Washington. She was at her home not far from here when all of this happened. They said that they did not feel anything was coming. She was in her bedroom doing some online shopping. Her husband was in the bathroom. Her 12-year-old son was in his room. And all of a sudden, she heard glass shattering. And within seconds, the walls of her bedroom had caved in on her. Her husband was able to grab her son, and then he went digging through the rubble for her. And I talked to her about what that was like and what it is like now, seeing all of this devastation in a community where she says everyone feels like family. I want to play a bit of that conversation.
We're in a small community. We have nothing. The rest of us, we have nothing. No running water, no lights, no houses, no transportation. A lot of people didn't have rentals insurance. I didn't.
And, you know, that is some of the devastation that we see, which we've been talking about. But there is so much underneath that. There's so much emotional pain here. Everybody in this community, as you mentioned, knows someone who died as a result of this. Melinda was telling me that after she got out of her home, all she heard around her was people yelling for help. Her husband went to start helping other people. They were gathering children around them. Many of the residents here were the first ones finding some of those people that had died and trying to get them to first responders and help them. And so much emotional pain here on top of the physical damage that people are dealing with. Gadi?
And all those calls for help at the beginning there, is there still a search and a rescue effort underway right now?
So search and rescue efforts have been suspended. That's what the state is saying. You mentioned that death toll. It now sits at 21 people in Mississippi and 1 person in Alabama, so a total of 22 people. And that number did tick down a bit, which we sometimes see in situations like this, because sometimes deaths are originally labeled as a storm-related death, and it may have ended up being a heart attack or something else like that. So it's not uncommon to see that number tick down. But those search and rescue efforts have been completed, and now the process of rebuilding is underway. People are cleanup, I should say. People are working to clear the roads, working to pick up what they can from their belongings before all of this is cleared out. And of course, there are electrical workers who have been out here throughout the day, still out here. You may see those flashing lights behind me, working to restore power. The water tower here was destroyed, so still no running water, and just working to get some semblance of this city back on track as this community moves in the direction of recovery. Gadi.
Such a sudden catastrophe. Priscilla, thanks so much. And NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now. Bill, can you give us a sense of just how powerful that tornado was to cause all that damage? Because from what I understand, this is one of the deadliest tornadoes in the state of Mississippi, right?
It looks like it's going to go down in the top 10 deadliest since we have records that have been kept in Mississippi. 170-mile-per-hour winds. It's kind of, you can picture driving on the highway, 60, 70, maybe 80 miles per hour, and doubling that. If you stuck your hand out the window, that's the force of this tornado. And that you've seen the pictures of what that can do. Here's that Rolling Fork area. The tornado formed right over the top of the Mississippi River. There's the tornado warnings, and then it stayed on the ground all the way past Silver City. And we were afraid Friday night when we were talking to you at this time, we were saying, haven't had any yet, but there's still the potential. The atmosphere is ripe for a strong tornado. And we didn't have an outbreak. We didn't have widespread tornadoes. We had one thunderstorm that started spinning really fast and really strong, and it produced the Rolling Fork to Silver City tornado. It was on the ground for about an hour. 59 miles. So it was traveling at about 60 miles per hour and about 60 miles on the ground. I mean, 1 hour of just this intense tornado. At the widest, it was 3/4 of a mile wide. Now, think about that next time you head out and go for a walk around your block, and think about how wide that tornado was at its max. It actually cycled at one point. The tornado dissipated, and then it actually reformed a new tornado. So it's not a continuous path for a tornado, but the second tornado, that one traveled 29 miles by itself and was an EF3. So very rare territory. Thankfully, we don't get these that often, but when we do, whatever they hit, it gets destroyed.
Wait, I'm sorry. So one of the tornadoes was about 60 miles, and then the other tornado, which is almost the same tornado, was another 30 miles?
Yeah, from the same thunderstorm.
So this is like a 90-mile long tornado with just a little bit of a break.
That's exactly right. I mean, we've had some in the biggest ones, the longest in history, have gone over 200 miles. But this is up there. I mean, this is pretty incredible. Very rare. Maybe once or twice a spring we'll get a tornado like this. Only in the worst outbreaks.
Unbelievable. Bill, thanks so much. And two big headlines out of Twitter that we're following tonight. According to court documents, pieces of the computer code used to run Twitter were leaked online, and now the company wants a subpoena to find the person responsible. And that comes after Elon Musk reportedly sent out a memo last week about Twitter's value. Now, the company is worth less than half of what Musk paid for it, down about $20 billion or so. NBC tech reporter Jake Ward is with me now. Jake, what is going on at Twitter? It feels like nonstop chaos these days, and yet people are still plugging away on the app.
It's absolutely true, Gadi. They are just continuing to plug away, but that, for those of us who watch this company for a living, it has just been so tense to watch it continuing to just, hit headline after headline. And I was trying to think, how do I communicate to Gadi just how tense it has been? And I was thinking about the experience of watching Christopher Nolan movies. And there's this particular auditory illusion, a hearing illusion that I want to share with you because I think you're going to get this, and I think it sort of communicates how we're all feeling about this. So there's a thing called a shepherd tone, and in the music you're hearing here from Dunkirk, you can hear the constantly rising tone, which is replaced at the bottom by this new tone 2 octaves down. It's this auditory illusion that creates the impression of sound going up and up and up and up, and the human brain just expects I don't know, if it was electronic dance music, it would expect the bass to drop, right? Or expect that it just can't possibly go any higher. This is why you sweat uncontrollably in Christopher Nolan movies, and this is why I sweat uncontrollably watching Twitter. This is exactly what's going on at Twitter. It just keeps getting crazier and crazier and does not stop. So at this point, you're right? The valuation has fallen apart. The code is exposed. People have left in droves. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's a little bit overwhelming, Gadi.
And yet you're still on the app. I mean, you summed it up perfectly. I totally get it's how I feel every single time you get on and then you refresh to see what's going to pop up. And then you're like, you know what? Maybe I should turn notifications on for this person and this person. And then the next thing you know, it is constantly going off in your pocket. I do want to ask, according to one reporter who saw Elon Musk's memo last week, he said that Elon Musk still seemed to see Twitter as a $250 billion company, which would be quite the turnaround from what we've seen. But if what you're saying is totally accurate, I mean, is there a method to the madness and the chaos that we might be seeing here? Is there a chance that this could turn around?
Yeah. The short-term answer here is that the strategy seems to be it's a way of paying people less in stock-related compensation than they would have gotten when the purchase price was $44 billion. Right now, valuing it at $20 billion allows him to pay people less, essentially. Saying, however, to them that it could eventually be worth $250 billion is basically saying stick around for this clear but difficult path to $250 billion, because at that point your money will be worth 10 times. And he is banking on the idea that because of SpaceX and all the other big gambles that he has won in the past, they'll stick with him. But I think the strategy here seems to be in the short term that we are just going to be paying these people less for the stock price at the moment, Gadi.
It's still a sizable gap. I mean, $230 billion, give or take a little bit here. Now, the computer codes that might have leaked online, how damaging could that be?
Yeah, well, it is incredibly damaging if that code contains, vulnerabilities that people could exploit, right? This is why companies are so desperate not to have their source code exposed, is because a hacker can suddenly look around and find certain vulnerabilities that might allow them to, get inside and get sensitive information from users, or maybe even take the site down. It's a big, big deal. This is why, of course, they seem to have reached out to GitHub, which published on its website the takedown request. That is where GitHub is where this code was supposedly done, and it may have very well have been from a Twitter insider who left last year. They went by the speech the title "Free Speech Enthusiast," which seems to be a play on a free speech absolutist, which is what Elon Musk calls himself. I'll just say here, in the ongoing increasing of tension when it comes to reporting on this stuff, we reached out to Twitter. When you write to press@twitter.com right now, you get an automated reply that shows a poop emoji. That's as much of a response we have from the company at the moment, Gadi.
And the base still has not dropped. Jake Ward, thanks so much. And still ahead, a deadly explosion at a chocolate factory in Pennsylvania. The blast was so destructive that some nearby homes were even knocked off their foundation. Officials are still trying to figure out what went wrong.
It's horrible. It's a shame. There's so many people, and I hope to God that count is wrong, so, I mean, any loss is bad, but I hope it don't go up any higher.
Now, we still don't know why a chocolate factory in Pennsylvania exploded on Friday, but we are learning more about those who were killed. And two of the victims were Amy Sando and Domingo Cruz. 5 other victims have yet to be identified. And recovery efforts are still underway in case there are more. Fox 29 caught it all on camera, the moment that the R.M. Palmer chocolate factory just exploded. It had been a staple in the community for 75 years. That's debris raining down on the entire neighborhood there. The explosion damaged several nearby buildings, and some of them even had to be condemned. NBC News correspondent George Solis joins us now from West Reading, Pennsylvania. George, we're learning more about the victims of this explosion, right? What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, that's right, Gadi. The coroner's office identifying 2 of the 7 victims of this deadly explosion. We know one of the victims, she was 49-year-old Amy Sando of Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and the other, Domingo Cruz of Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, the coroner's office is careful not to release the names of any more of the victims until they are absolutely sure that all of the next of kin have been notified. This is a small town, so a lot of people here know one another, and we know that the chocolate factory here at the center of this explosion has been in this community for generations, so many people here are closely intertwined, so the pain here tonight is very real. Over the weekend, there was word of one lone survivor. Many were hoping that that would be the case for the rest of the people that were trapped underneath this avalanche of debris and rubble. Sadly, that has not been the case. And so there is a lot of grieving, a lot of mourning that will be taking place in the coming days, Gadi.
And George, that explosion, it didn't just take lives and destroy jobs, right? People are homeless now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Officials holding a press conference today saying that a number of people were displaced because of some of the mixed businesses and residential intertwined there at the bottom of the hill here. And so luckily, because this is such a tight-knit community, a number of federal resources and local resources have been banding together to raise money for everybody that has been impacted. And we can report that that amount of fund that was created for the people here has already raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that number expected to grow in the coming days. And I did mention some federal resources. That's going to be available to the people here for the coming days, if not weeks, as they piece together this investigation, which at this point, officials still not revealing what caused this explosion, but they are working diligently and around the clock to provide this community some much needed answers. Gadi?
Some much needed help as well. NBC George Solis. And what was meant to be a celebration of faith and community ended with gunfire at a Sikh event in California. 3 men got into an argument at a massive Sikh temple in Sacramento yesterday, which led to 2 of them being shot, all while thousands gathered to celebrate and worship. KCRA reporter Oko Mana has the story.
Thousands of people march in the streets around the Sacramento Sikh Society Temple to celebrate Nagar Kirtan. It's a religious event for the Sikh community, and this is the first time a parade has happened in Sacramento.
The parade is just one opportunity for us to walk together and pray together and show our solidarity.
But the fun and festive celebrations were interrupted by a shooting.
It was very chaotic.
Manjeet Kara and her son were at the temple when everything unfolded.
In a church where you're supposed to come and be at peace and serenity, and this kind of violence is going on, it's disgusting.
The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office tells KCRA 3 men were involved at a fight on the temple grounds. 2 of them fired their weapons. Both men who were shot were taken to the hospital in critical condition, but are expected to be okay.
We want everybody to come in here, enjoy themselves, be able to celebrate, be able to worship without the worry of something like this happening.
The Sheriff's Office says it appears the 3 men involved in the fight and eventual shooting all knew each other, which makes what happened even more upsetting for temple leaders.
The committee is humble and sorry to all the people who showed up this happened.
They're disheartened something like this unfolded at their house of worship, especially during a major event. They vow to prevent acts of violence in the future and are keeping their heads held high.
It hurts, but we'll be back. We're here. We're not going anywhere. Two bad people not going to ruin what we have going for us and the community.
That's everyone's goal as they try to move forward.
I hope it does not create any stain on the legacy of this Gurudwara church.
Orko Mana, thank you. After the break, another setback for the prosecution in the Rust movie case, what it means for Alec Baldwin. But first, you got to see this train derailment, and I know what you might be thinking. No, this is not footage from East Palestine, Ohio last month. This happened overnight in Richland County, North Dakota. 31 out of the train's 70 cars derailed, and some started leaking hazardous material like liquid asphalt. Luckily, no one was hurt, and officials say there is no danger to the public. We'll be right back. And it's time now for some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. The man suing Gwyneth Paltrow over a 2016 ski accident testified in front of a jury today, and he says the dramatic crash permanently damaged his brain.
Everything was great, and then I heard something I've never heard at a ski resort, and that was a blood-curdling scream. Just, I can't do it. It was, and then, boom.
Gwyneth Paltrow, however, says she remembers it differently. She claims she was downhill of Sanderson when he hit her. In L.A. today, a group of Taylor Swift fans took their bad blood to court, suing Ticketmaster over the botched sale of the Eras Tour. And the Swifties are not alone here. Just a few days ago, Drake fans in Canada filed a similar suit against the company. And lawmakers in Colorado worked through the weekend to pass 2 new gun reform bills. One would expand the state's red flag laws, while the other would make it easier to sue gun manufacturers and dealers. These new measures come after hundreds of Denver students came to the Capitol demanding action after another school shooting. And some drama on the LAX tarmac this weekend during a flight that was bound for Seattle. Right before takeoff, a man allegedly ran to the emergency exit door, opened it, triggered the emergency slide, and then got arrested. And get ready to dance. We are down to the Final Four in men's March Madness. For the first time since 1979, no team is seated higher than number 4. Florida Atlantic is taking on San Diego State, while UConn battles it out with the Miami Hurricanes, and both games are on Saturday. And the grand jury in the case looking into Trump and the alleged hush money he paid to porn star Stormy Daniels reconvened today. And this guy, David Pecker, provided testimony for the second time. Pecker is the former publisher of National Enquirer. Meanwhile, over the weekend, Trump had this to say.
I have no idea what's going to happen, but I can tell you that they have no case. So I think I think they've already dropped the case, from what I understand. I think it's been dropped. It's a fake case. They have absolutely nothing.
NBC's Vaughn Hilliard has more. Vaughn?
On Monday, the grand jury continued its proceedings and its investigation into allegations of the arrangement between Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, and Stormy Daniels for an alleged hush money payment ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Another witness, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, went before that grand jury on Monday afternoon, all while Donald Trump held firm here at his Mar-a-Lago private residence. This comes after a weekend in which Donald Trump went on the offensive. He traveled for a campaign rally to Waco, Texas, where he called it prosecutorial misconduct. This is a two-pronged campaign at this point. One, to undercut the reputations of the investigators, these prosecutors looking into him. But then the second part is trying to win the Republican nomination for president. He still has a substantial lead over his potential chief competitor, Ron DeSantis. And you saw him on stage go on the offensive here, trying to galvanize public support in his defense. Vaughn Hilliard, NBC News.
And the Rust movie may be filming in Montana soon, but what happened in New Mexico still looms over the film. And the case against actor and producer Alec Baldwin appears to be on shaky ground right now. Just a few weeks ago, the DA's office lost their star prosecutor. The DA asked to hire another one from outside their office to help out, but today the judge blocked that request. The DA said that her office simply doesn't have enough manpower to prosecute the case alone. In response, the judge essentially said, too bad.
You have indicated a dilemma in your response because you're saying that you don't have enough staff to do this. So that would tell me, yes, you cannot prosecute. However, you're also saying that I plan to stay in because there's nothing that prevents me from not staying in. And that's not true. So if you cannot prosecute, you cannot prosecute.
And joining us now is NBC's Maura Barrett. So, Maura, this is not looking good for the prosecutor's case here.
No, it's pretty confusing. So I'm going to try to play courtroom translator about what happened today. Basically, the judge and the district attorney went back and forth because the state is looking to appoint a new special prosecutor. Alec Baldwin got what he wanted, got rid of the other special prosecutor because she was playing a dual role as a Republican lawmaker. The district attorney wants help. She says they're understaffed, they're under budget, they need someone else, another special prosecutor to be brought in. Alec Baldwin's team has no problem with this, but it was actually Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer's lawyers, that said, hey, you're going against all these other legal statutes that we have. You can't use a special prosecutor because of a budget issue. It's an ethics violation. Lots of statutes jargon was thrown around. Ultimately, the judge said either you can choose to prosecute the case on your own to the district attorney, or if you need help, you can ask for a special prosecutor, but then you can have no involvement in it. So all of the work she's done leading up to this, she could have to tap out. And so the judge is now giving them until Friday to decide exactly what they're going to want to do going forward. But again, the district attorney is really looking for that help. And whoever comes in to help now only has 5 weeks to get read in on the case and get ready for that next preliminary hearing.
What does this mean for Alec Baldwin?
Well, it means that it's another win for him and his team. They were able to get the special prosecutor they didn't want out. They were also able to get those gun enhancement charges that, if sentenced, could add another 5 years to both Alec Baldwin and the armorer's sentence out because they said it was unconstitutional based on what the special prosecutor had previously done. And this just means that it's a shaky ground for prosecutors. The defense over and over again has been able to weaken the state's arguments, and leading up to trial when they still haven't presented evidence, that's the next step in terms of this court timeline. It could mean that this trial altogether could be thrown out, which obviously would be good news for Alec Baldwin.
So the next chapter starts on Friday.
Yes, on Friday for this next deadline. There's a few other status hearings that are going to be in between, but the next big timeline nugget that you'll want to check off is that preliminary hearing in which the judge will look at evidence and decide whether or not they'll actually go to trial. That's the first week in May.
We'll be watching for it, Maura. Thanks so much for joining us. And today, if you have money in Silicon Valley Bank, you might need to check to see if you've got a new money manager. A bank that was about half the size bought some of SVB's assets at a massive discount. And now the North Carolina-based First Citizens Bank oversees 17 new branches. Now, at the end of last year, Silicon Valley Bank was the 16th largest bank in the United States. First Citizens Bank was 30th. This purchase is kind of like a minnow eating a tuna. So how does it work? NBC News and business technology correspondent Brian Chung joins me now. Brian, for all of us non-finance people, the math doesn't seem to be math in here. Can you bring us up to speed?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into the whole bank balance sheet accounting wizardry here, but essentially what's happening is that when a bank is in distress, well, you're writing down a lot of those assets. They are no longer worth as much as they originally thought. So, yes, Silicon Valley Bank was about double the size of First Citizens prior to all of these banking issues. But as we know, they had a securities portfolio that essentially blew up. And because of that, the government, which stepped in 2 weeks ago to take ownership of this bank because it went under, started writing down a lot of those assets. So it was worth a lot less at the time of its sale. And even then, the government, the FDIC, had to sweeten the deal a little bit by actually offering a discount, a sales tag, if you will, on the purchase, which allowed First Citizens, which was originally smaller than this bank, to come in and ultimately buy them. Now, for what it's worth, they didn't buy all of the assets. The FDIC, as a reminder, is going to hold on to about $90 billion of assets that First Citizens didn't buy. But for what it's worth, those who were investors in First Citizens seem to be reacting positively to the transaction. The stock was up over 50% in trading this Monday. And interestingly, it also shows confidence in the banking system that even if a bank goes under and the government takes ownership of it, there might be other banks that are willing to go in there and buy it. Something hopefully positive that could stop the bleeding in the banking space, which has been very volatile the last few weeks, Gadi.
And apart from this fire sale, do you think that the state of the banking industry is much more solid right now than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we haven't seen any other bank failures here in the United States since the closure of both Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank 2 weeks ago. So that seems to point in the right direction. However, there are some concerns that there are still some deposit outflows at some institutions, but we'll get a little bit more detail on that in congressional testimony. A number of regulators are going to be appearing in front of the Senate Banking Committee tomorrow. They might have some interesting insight into the state of the banking industry in that hearing.
And we're looking forward to that report. NBC's Brian Chung, thanks so much. And things are pretty tense in Israel right now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced plans to temporarily overhaul Israel's judicial system, and people, including some in his own party, were furious. They have been protesting for weeks now, and it's starting to turn into a full-blown crisis, affecting everything from medical services, governmental functions, flights. And because of that, just a few hours ago, Netanyahu says he's putting the plan on pause. NBC's Raf Sanchez has more.
Gadi, in the face of extraordinary pressure both at home and abroad, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tonight backing down, or at least partly. He is saying that he is prepared to delay his controversial plan to weaken Israel's Supreme Court at least until Parliament's next session, so sometime this summer. This concession from Netanyahu coming after these really unprecedented months of protests on the streets here in Jerusalem and back in Tel Aviv. Protesters have been blocking roads, blocking major highways, but also today we saw a new level of the opposition, a general strike declared all across Israel. This country's only international airport shut down for international flights. So Israel basically cut off from the world for a number of hours earlier today. Daycares, banks, restaurants all across this country closed as workers took to the streets. Netanyahu feeling he basically at this point had no choice but to delay. And in his address to the nation, he said he was taking taking a pause to prevent the possibility of civil war, which gives you a sense of just how high the rhetoric is here right now. But Netanyahu is also under pressure from the far right of his own government. His conservative base, far-right members of his cabinet want to see him push ahead with this legislation. And the question now for protesters is, have they won? Have they defeated this plan from Netanyahu? Or is it going to be back again in a few weeks' time? The protesters say they are prepared to stay on the streets for as long as it takes. And the White House is watching very closely also. We heard earlier today from the White House press secretary saying she welcomes this delay, that the U.S. wants to see some kind of compromise, that they are very uncomfortable about the deep divisions that Netanyahu's plan has brought into Israeli society and the potential impact it could have on Israel's military. Because we've seen in recent weeks thousands of military reservists from elite units in the Air Force, in the Special Forces, saying they will not serve for a country that they no longer consider a democracy if this legislation goes through. So for now, a delay to this plan, relative quiet on the streets here in Jerusalem, but it is far from clear that this political crisis is over. Gadi.
Raf Sanchez, thanks so much. And when we come back, the future of everything, we're going to show you drone racing in action. And before we do, imagine being able to play a video game, then all of a sudden, the skills you pick up playing that video game translate straight over to the real world. Sign me up.
If you get really good at playing the game, how quickly can you become an effective drone racer?
I mean, honestly, right away.
And when you think of the future of sports, what comes to mind? What do you think stadiums are going to look like? What do you think athletes are going to look like? Will robots replace some of them? Well, in a lot of ways, the future of sports is already here, and it's some of the most visual stuff you'll ever see. Welcome to the world of drone racing. It is part competition, part technology, and part entertainment, but it's a lot harder than it looks.
Drone racing has everything that makes pro sports a big business. The competition.
Halo Walker gets the win!
The fans.
Absolutely incredible.
The excitement.
Let's go!
Even a little trash talk.
You know what time it is? It's Gadi time, baby! Woo!
One of you is going to beat the other one pretty mercilessly, huh?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get worked, so we know how it's going to go.
Ben Hover and Halo Walker are two of drone racing's biggest stars. Both have qualified for the league's season finale, the World Championships in Miami.
Can you describe that moment when you put on the goggles?
It gives you a complete sense of actual flight. It's probably the closest thing to flying yourself and racing against people in the air.
Technology for us is our competitive edge, is being able to put cameras on the drones to really feel as if you are flying in the drone. So nothing gets a better first-person view than having a camera and you're literally the drone.
It's almost like horse racing, but except for when you watch, you get to be on the horse in the race as well.
We operate like any other professional global sports or entertainment property. You have elite athletes that compete during your season. There's a circuit of races that happen, and there's the drones that are pretty much the stars of the show in addition to the pilots.
And just like most races, there are crashes, a lot of them.
Hanover is down.
Puts both of them out of the race, and it takes away that momentum.
Close followed by Siva. Oh, my God.
What happens when one of these crashes? Do they get penalized?
No, I cry a little bit inside. But, you know, we put another drone on and they go for their next heat. I mean, that's our job to worry about the drones.
Back in New York City, David Yee and his team of DRL engineers repair hundreds of drones after every single race.
You got this one taken apart here. How many pieces are in each one of these drones?
About 1,500 pieces to make up a drone.
And all those pieces make up a machine that packs a serious punch.
So first, I want you to try to just get it up in the air. Try to keep it stable. All right. There you go. There you go. Now try to pitch forward a little bit. Yeah, there you go. You see it coming at you? Yep. All right. Whoa. How's that throttle? Keep going. Now you can drop it down.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Holy
Let's disarm the drones.
Okay, disarm. Yeah.
All right, so that was clearly out of my league. But what about the virtual one? That's got to be easier, right?
Ah! Oh! Ah!
Off.
Oh! Nope, that's down.
Nice.
Ah! Oh, man. I flipped too hard.
We get all the physical parameters of these drones and build it into the game so people can practice on the game.
If you get really good at playing the game, how quickly can you become an effective drone racer?
I mean, honestly, right away.
And it's the younger generations identifying the most with drone racing. DRL's TikTok account already has as many followers as Formula One and more than the NHL and Major League Soccer. How do you describe drone racing fans?
I feel like drone racing fans are the best fans there are in the world. I mean, this sport itself is the sport of the future.
Where do you see this in 10 years?
We are the F1 of the skies. When you think about a global circuit of racing, we should be racing every weekend around the world.
I honestly see kids getting into this younger and younger, being even more talented than our current pilots.
Wild. And when we come back, cracking down on fentanyl going north and guns going south. A look at a possible game-changing deal between the U.S. and Mexico. Stay tuned. The Biden administration is going to announce a deal with Mexico that's supposed to tackle two big problems, guns and fentanyl. NBC News has learned that this deal means that Mexico will crack down on drug labs and smuggling fentanyl into the United States. And in return, the U.S. will restrict the flow of guns into Mexico. NBC's Alice Barr has more.
Across the country, the deadly drug fentanyl is ravaging communities and stealing young lives through a surge in overdoses. Among them, Dina Loudon's son, Matthew.
I don't get to hear his laughter anymore.
Now, as she tries to warn other kids away.
This stuff is horrible, and it's in everything.
NBC News has learned the U.S. is preparing to announce a major deal with Mexico to stem the flow of fentanyl coming across the southern border by partnering to track raw materials, find and shut down labs, and go after drug dealers. That, according to two sources familiar with the plans. It's welcome news to school officials on the front lines of the fentanyl fight.
This is a deadly game that kids are playing.
This school board member in Springfield, Virginia, co-hosting a town hall tomorrow night.
Where you can watch even from one high school to the next geographically as this fentanyl moves through. And it is terrifying. And I think anything that we can do that cuts it off at the source.
In exchange for Mexico's cooperation on fentanyl, sources telling NBC News the U.S. will crack down on American guns crossing into Mexico. That after the gun used in the killing of two kidnapped Americans in Mexico earlier this month has been linked to a Texas man who, according to court documents, admitted that he knew the firearm would be sent to a Mexican cartel.
Alice, thank you. And finally, in the heat of World War II, their hard work kept American tanks rolling and bombers flying. And 80 years later, they are still being honored. Here's Andrea Mitchell.
From the factory floors to recruiting posters and songs. Few women in American history are as iconic as Rosie the Riveter.
How old were you when you started working in the factory?
Well, I just graduated out of high school. Putting their lives on hold to build the bombers and tanks that helped win the war. These Rosies, most in their 90s, 4 older than 100, are now being honored for their service.
We worked like heck to beat the guys' butts out of there for doing what they did to our boys out in Pearl Harbor.
From a national necessity, starting a revolution for women in the workplace, and proud of it.
Up until 1941, it was a man's world, and they didn't realize how capable women are. There's nothing I don't think that a woman can't do. It's up to the woman whether she wants a career raising a family or whether she wants to be an astronaut. We have that choice now.
Today, invited to Washington on an honor flight usually reserved for World War II veterans, dedicated to the Rosies, asking tour guides to let them pose in front of the suffragette statue in the Capitol, and visiting the World War II memorial.
We weren't doing it for honors or rewards. We were doing it to save our country and save our brothers and uncles and aunts, whoever were working. Doing all that crappy work in a factory
so they can put their lives on the line, it was worth it to have them come back.
A group proud of all they accomplished in the war and for women for years to come. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
Heroes back then and heroes today, too. Andrea Mitchell, thanks so much. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.